soon as this hits live. All right, perfect. Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have Michael Slater with us. He will be leading the discussion. Before I hand the mic over, I wanted to let you, our viewers, know about the Q&A feature located on the right-hand side of your screen. If at any point you have any questions, you can post it here, and Michael will be happy to answer them. All right, without any further delay, take it away, Michael.
All right, thank you, Jordan. And thank you, everyone, joining us today for your Friday lunch. I hope you've got something good to eat. Today, we're going to talk about the observability of software. First, though, a little bit about me. I'm a technical director at Improving. What that means is I meet with people doing cool things, and I figure out how to solve their problems with software. I really enjoy talking to businesses and their different problems, understanding domains, and making cool solutions. So if you ever are wanting to talk to us, hit me up. My LinkedIn's there. And I also enjoy, of course, barbecuing. Here in Houston, Texas, we have a huge barbecue culture. And I've got my son there, right? We're at the Houston Zoo. And I also enjoy cycling. I'm a big family guy. And so we just do a bunch of barbecuing, cycling, things like that together. And of course, when everyone else goes to sleep, I enjoy playing some video games, and especially Knockout City, which is like tactical dodgeball, is one of my big games right now online. So if you play that, hit me up. I'd be happy to play with you. But on to our agenda, talking about observability in software. We're going to go over what is application performance monitoring, different key performance indicators you can have about software performance, and a big part of this discussion is your APM useful to product owners? And I believe it is. And we're going to talk about techniques to show the value and show the capabilities of APM systems that help product managers and product owners manage software systems and make good decisions. So let's talk about, the whole concept of software systems and observability, right? And observability is to understand the state of a system based on data it generates, right? And there's three key, I'd say, buckets of data a system generates from a, just a data perspective, right? That's logs. Those are, in your software code, you may log messages, right? Saying, oh, this variable is this value at this time, right? These logs typically show a sequence of events. They may highlight milestones in the progression of a processing system, and they have error messages, right? The key is that logs should be reportable. One thing to think about, logs should always have, like, sometimes it's a thread ID, or if it's an authorized system, like the current user ID, maybe what part of the system it's in, things like that. And it needs to be an immutable record, right? So this is where you can go back and look at, hey, here's some raw data the system generated that helped me understand how it's performing at any given time. And then we have metrics. Metrics are very important because they're quantitative values that indicate performance of a system. And when I say quantitative, I'm thinking of things like, how long it takes a request to execute or a piece of code to execute, right? Maybe how much memory you're consuming in software. And it doesn't even have to be operational. It can be how long it took a user to complete, what you may call a feature or a workflow in your application, right? And that's a metric that's quantitative that you can measure and record, right? And between all the aggregate of metrics you record, you may be able to define and observe correlations. You may be able to identify kind of outliers and understand why those are occurring, and develop a system of metrics that tells you things about your system, right? And traces are kind of a little bit less talked about, but they're very important. Traces are sort of the execution path or the sequence of instructions through a large system. Traces are very important today because software systems have become very distributed, right? If you launch your software on any public cloud or even private clouds, there's a whole array of tools and systems that is making your software. It used to be you had like a single server and a database, right? So you had a server talking to a database, it generated some server-side generated views. But now at a minimum, we have, even a front end and a back end server. We have a data cache system between the database. We may have two databases. One may be relational for relational type data, another may be non-relational, kind of a key value store or fast data. We have service buses or other kind of event-driven systems, and all kinds of tools and systems that create what is a software product today, right? Because developers are piecing together niche tools that are very good at a specific task, and they piece them together to accomplish hard problems with software, right? It is way beyond your simple, single application server and single SQL database that it used to be, right? And I mean, used to be isn't a long time ago. And it is important to be able to trace the execution of a single process sometimes across these systems and see how the performance is, see how the interactivity is, and if it even interacts in a way that you understand, so you can understand how your product is performing, right? Twitter wrote this blog post back in 2013 about how they observe Twitter, right? And you think about Twitter, that's a consumer product that is used across the world. I mean, I don't know how many tweets are posted a minute, but it's probably in the millions, right? And they want to know if it's going down, if tweets are going fast, if people are being able to see tweets. There's all kinds of things about Twitter, right, that they want to see and characterize about their service to see if it's working or not. And this is a concept that applies, not to just the big software products, like Twitter or Facebook or what have you, but even to enterprise applications and your small consumer apps, your small business-to-business apps. There are two key questions that I typically speak to IT teams to start about talking about the basics of observability. The first one is mean time to detection, right? And this is really your first key thing you need to track. And reading it, it's the interval between the time that an error or other system issue occurs and the time it's detected, right? And detected means you're aware of it, right? Like your IT team, your software team, your operations team knows it's happened. They either saw it on a dashboard or maybe an alert was pushed to them, and they're aware of an issue, right? And a lot of organizations, their mean time to detection, is when a user picks up the phone or calls them or tweets at them or emails them. That is the worst way that you can be aware of an issue in your system, is when your users actually take the time to inform you, right? And a lot of users won't tell you. They may just stop using your product. They may go to a competitor product, right? Because they just get frustrated. So having a mean time to detection that is fast and automated and driven by data is extremely important to build a competency around in your software product and to measure, right, what your average is. And you want to get that down to a time that is acceptable, for your product's use case. The next metric, once you have MTTD, that you want to shoot for is mean time to resolution, right? And this is, you've detected your issue, right? But now it needs to be fixed, right? So this is the responsiveness of a team from the detection to putting out a solution, right? And the solution may be a complete fix. It may be a Band-Aid solution. It may be a workaround, right? But it's anything to provide some resolution to the problem that allows, the people to move forward, right? It may even be the graceful failure of a system, as, a deeper, solution might have to be found, right? But this speaks to the responsiveness of IT teams, really that kind of agility piece. And it gets into like, how are your DevOps processes? What kind of tools do you have to gracefully fail systems within your software product, right? And how do the tools that first helped you just detect a problem, but then how do your tools additionally help you diagnose a problem? Because there's a difference between detecting an issue and then diagnosing why is that issue occurring, right? And then the automation behind all of that lets you get the solution out the door, right? So let's talk about what an APM is, right? An APM is application performance monitoring. This is your first tool into monitoring observability for a system, right? And we kind of have a website example up here in this picture. But as you can see, we have some GET requests in this picture, and it has how many have failed, right? And how many users you have. And some of these, in fact, all of them are awful. They've all failed. If you look at it, something is majorly wrong with this picture. This is telling us right away that, hey, all of my API endpoints are failing. I mean, this could be something major like your whole database is down, right? But the idea here is a tool is giving us a visual indicator. You know, I see a graph, I see a table with information. It's very easy to read. It's using good colors, right? This tool is immediately pointing out anomalies and failures, right? And it is the first assistance to a product team that could improve performance or improve failures, right? That is way beyond trying to sift through logs to see if you see error messages or waiting for your users to let you know that that something's failing, right? Apms also can tell you a little bit about user analytics. Now, there are two parts, I believe, to an APM. There's kind of the performance of your technology, but then there's the performance of how your technology is serving the user experience. And that's user analytics, right? And understanding the user behavior and its interaction with your product, with your tool, right? Seeing the page views, seeing how the experience is for performance. Because, you know, slow performance is bad, but how is that slow performance maybe affecting how users are interacting with your app? Is it changing engagement? Is it changing retention, right? And then beyond that, are you tracking how users progress through your app? Like, do they actually go through the most happy path that you've created as a development team where like, oh, the user is going to click on this, and then finish with this fourth button? What if you actually track that and realize that your users take a path you don't expect, right? Or what if you see only 50% of your users complete a path and you expected 90%, right? So there's this whole host of user analytics that most of these APMs can track. And speaking of APMs, there's a lot of them out there, right? This is just a small handful of logos I've collected. There's so much more than this. But a lot of them are built into major cloud vendors. A lot of these are SaaS solutions provided independently. Some of them are kind of technology and stack specific, and others, you know, support a broad array of technology and deployment scenarios. So you kind of have to go out and do a lot of research in both capabilities for observing your software system. Then there's pricing. There's what kind of data you get out of it versus what you need. So when you're picking an APM tool, you have to do a lot of research. And, you know, it's okay to pick one and experiment, see if it works for you or not, and change it up. You can even use 2 or 3 at once as you're going through an evaluation. But, you know, just kind of get out there and figure out who the major players are and see who you'd want to start with. One example I'm going to throw up here is Application Insights. It's one built into Microsoft's Azure cloud. I use it a lot personally. And this is just an example of how it fits in, and kind of any APM may fit in like this too, into an application, but it's an actual SDK. It's a library that you directly attach to your source code, right? So like if you're using like .NET or Java, it's got a library that you actually install in your software, and you may even utilize the library code in your software. Of course, a lot of these APMs have auto detection and kind of just figure things out because they're written to understand and observe passively, you know, major software frameworks in the industry, right? But once it's attached to your code and it's attached to your cloud system, then it's kind of got its eyes and ears, and it's listening to everything. It's observing traces between your system. It's kind of auto detecting performance issues or anomalies, right? It's going to collect the right amount of data even to perhaps help you dive in and diagnose an issue and see what users are doing in your applications. And it's doing this continuously, nonstop, by the second. And it can group buckets of performance by minute, by hour, by day, by month, right? The longer you collect data, it'll be able to aggregate it over time, and you can draw up correlations and what have you. And so getting one of these integrated into your software system is key. Almost all of them need some kind of integration point, and some of the integrations can go really deep. Some of the integrations are lighter, something to consider. All right, so getting into the meat of what these measure, we have some standard operations that you can get from many of these metrics. All right, and this is things where, you know, how many failed requests do you have versus successful requests, right? How many requests fail because of an application error versus because your server was unavailable because it was either too busy serving requests or was just down, right? Is your CPU utilization the bottleneck, right? Is your memory utilization, you know, your RAM of the server, the bottleneck, right? Is I/O a bottleneck, right? Like I/O performance between disk or between your database, right? A lot of these are very standard metrics. They help you know a few key things like, why is my application slower down? And then what are some like basic reasons why that may be, right? So it kind of answers that, you know, that time to detection, but it also helps you answer the why so you can get to your time of resolution, right? Those are our standard operations. Beyond that, when you talk about failures, you want to know why things are failing, right? There could be exceptions in your app code. That's when an exception is when your software does something you didn't program for. It's completely unexpected, right? And then usually they have an error message and tell you where about in your software system that occurred, right? It may be a failure in a dependency. And a dependency is kind of like you have your main application code. Dependencies are kind of those add-on tools like your database, your event bus system, right? Maybe your cache system, those kind of off-the-shelf tools that you're using for your application. Those are dependencies, right? Where you're not writing your code, but your code's using the tool, right? And those usually provide error messages or their own metrics, and you can kind of drill down and understand why they may be failing. There's also all the APM tools have kind of a log-based approach to analytics because there's where tools can plug in and they just know and understand almost magically, right, how all of these tools are fitting in. Like they understand a SQL database and they understand a SQL connection. But additionally, if you are really adept at writing log statements in your application code, you can consider writing those in a way that you can later query in a log-based query languages. And there's a ton of tools that do this. Splunk, for example, made this very popular, one of the old original APM tools, completely log-based, but it let you write a Splunk query where you could aggregate Splunk queries into graphs, right? And you know, you could have like line graphs, bar graphs, right? Based off of just data you logged, right? In queries, and it didn't have to understand any part of your code but logs. Right, and this is still a very valid way to do APM. It's super powerful. Maybe one of the downsides is you have to be really disciplined in the way you write your logs, that you expose consistent data in a way that's easy to parse in your logging system, and then that you know will aggregate well into metrics, right? Like if you want to summarize it, count it by an hourly bucket or however you want to do that. So you have to get really good at writing logs and then writing queries to do those logs. But if you have very complex systems that do have a lot of opportunity for logging and you're really using a lot of dependencies, this may be a great approach because it can give you deep insight into your system, right? Talking about availability, I mentioned earlier, your dependencies may fail, right? They may go down. Your main app server may go down. The server serving your UI may go down. Your CDN may, you know, be malfunctioning. Availability, though, as a concept, is understanding, is your product available or not, right? Can they go to your website and it executes successfully? Is everything returning? Is everything green on the board, right? Or are you having degradation, right? And degradation is like, it's not available to someone. Maybe it's not available to a region, right? Like, you know, to a part of a country or to a whole, you know, other part of the world, and you expect it to be available there. Because maybe your application is so distributed, only part of it is down. And you need to measure, hey, is it up for these users? Is this part of my application up? And there's all kinds of ways to ensure that that healthy connections to your systems are available. You can typically set up availability as also a metric that you track as an organization. You create SLAs with your product group or your business. Say, hey, we want to kind of create this guarantee that our app is available. And let's call it like, some people talk about the 4 nines, 99.99% of the time. That really only gives you like 12 minutes of downtime a day, right? And you can track that as a metric to say, are we successful or not in the availability of our product, right? And you have to do a bunch of ways to gather that data, say, hey, is it available? You have to do it every second or every minute. You have to be pinging health check endpoints to see, are you on track? And if you go below your metrics, go below your promises, you need to take action, right? You need to hold yourself accountable to the metrics you set and take action to get back to target. When you consume cloud services, right? Like if you're on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, etc., their products have availability guarantees. They give you an SLA, right? They say, hey, my SLA for providing a managed database is 99.95. And you actually have to consider that, right? If the SLA of a product you're using is only 99.95, your SLA to your product group probably can't ever be higher than that, right? Like in some ways, your best availability is kind of the sum of its weakest part, right? So if the weakest critical component of your system only gives you a 80% availability, well, then that's your chance of failure across your whole app, unless you can somehow gracefully fail that system or provide an alternative, right? Those are the things you need to consider in availability, right? And that goes into how you triage distributed applications. It really helps to have some kind of view like this one here you see that shows you how applications are doing across different systems, right? And this is like a really good visual metrics. I see like a red line between a few of these systems. That's indicating like there's too much failure between this node and that node, right? And a lot of the tools provide these kinds of traceability out of the box, right? And this is not seeing necessarily like code is failing, but this is seeing like a distributed system is failing between points. And actually, the reason this is important is both the actual systems could be fine. You could have a network error. You could have had a firewall rule put in place that affected all of a sudden the communication of your components. So this starts really helping you diagnose, hey, where in my giant system are things failing? And the last thing an APM really should do for you is real-time by the second metrics. So everything I talked about, you should be able to see kind of in real time, right? Like maybe there's some real-time graphs that are only seconds behind what's happening out there right now. And maybe that they're able then, if you can get the data real time, they can alert you, right? And you can use alert tools, right? There's like stuff like PagerDuty or even getting email alerts, text message alerts, right? Hey, your system's down, your engineers need to get on it, right? Getting that push notification to an operations team saying, hey, something's wrong, go look, because you don't necessarily have to have people staring at a dashboard looking for a graph to go the wrong way, right? You actually need information pushed to you in real time when any of this goes bad. So once you have all of this set up, once you have all of these different types of metrics, you usually want to create a custom dashboard that bring in one spot all of the most important parts of your specific application or product, right? Because some products have different concerns on why they may fail. Some components are more critical than others, and you want to create dashboards that bring that to the forefront of your attention that you can look at in a quick pinch, right? They may highlight important errors, important communication paths between your systems. They may highlight an important segment of users even, right? And so consider, once you get everything up and running in your APM tool, creating this custom dashboard. I kind of want to put this start getting your questions out. I've gone over a lot of information up to this point, but what other think about the application you may work on, right? What features do you think your applications need most from an APM platform, right? What is key to you? Because different platforms also are good at different things. Some do things better than others. Some have a deeper technical focus versus a user focus, etc. While you get your questions in, I'm going to talk about two major segments. One is key features for enterprises, right? And when I say enterprises, I may mean like enterprise applications, right? Applications that are written for a business, for that business's employees to consume. They have kind of some specific concerns. They are concerned about their applications, of course, being available, having the right security, of course, making sure it's not available outside their enterprise, but roles-based security within. And they want to know that the workflows that those applications provide to run the business, those workflows are being completed successfully by users, right? Like you want to be able to have some kind of user analytic metric that says, hey, all the users that are supposed to be using this are successfully using it and accomplishing a valuable goal, for your organization. And you want to track, are people using this application kind of usually on a monthly basis? Are all the users who are supposedly supposed to get value from this application, are they doing that on the regular cadence? Maybe that's by month, maybe it's by week, by day, etc. Kind of identify what that most, important kind of activity metric is and measure it, track it. One thing you don't see here, by the way, is usually user growth. A lot of enterprise applications, your kind of user pool is very fixed, right? So you just want to know that everyone you think is supposed to be using it is using it. Maybe at the very beginning of deploying an enterprise app, you care about the growth, but that really tapers off really quick. It's generally not a chief concern. And then though, talking about that active user, you want to know when users stop using it because maybe they find a better tool, or just doing it without the tool is better for them because your tool kind of isn't great. So those are things you need to measure. Now, then there's key features for consumer apps. And these might be very different, right? So consumer apps are chiefly concerned with growth, right? So if you're building a new, consumer app, let's maybe say you have a subscription model, people pay to use your thing per month. Maybe it's like a note-taking app or something. You are really concerned about user growth and acquisition. And you want to make sure you measure performance and activity and user experience that facilitates user growth, right? Like what gets people through your sign-up page? What gets people through the payment page? Are there errors in any of those areas? Like if an error happens, does a frustrated user leave, right? Do they try again? You have to answer those questions in a consumer app, right? And then your revenue funnel features, like maybe you're a retail, you're selling products. Like what kind of features that you're providing actually gets people to the revenue funnel, like to your checkout cart, right? Maybe it's to purchasing that monthly subscription or whatever it is that drives revenue. You want to know the path. And we're going to talk a lot about this, the path users take to get to revenue, right? And a big part of consumer apps is high performance tuning. Right? Users are really angry if your app is slow, like really angry. They will just stop using it. High performance apps are like a default expectation these days. Consumers do not tolerate slow apps at all. Unlike enterprise users, sometimes they have no choice but to use your slow app. A lot of IT teams, for various reasons, can't get performance up there, but it's not as important as consumer apps where your revenue may just disappear from under you if your competitor's app is faster and better. Right. So that's a chief concern to measure. Talking about security, of course, same thing. You want to secure user data, your login systems, etc. And availability. You never want downtime, right? You want it, they go to your app's website or open it up on their phone or whatever it is, you want it to be there. And to keep that, you definitely want preemptive problem detection. So you want to know when any performance is slowly even trending bad, or availability is trending bad, even if you're within defined parameters of success. If it's still trending towards bad, you want to know and stop that before it becomes an actually bad thing, right? And so, yeah, if there are any questions right now, Jordan, now's a good time about key concerns for consumers' enterprise apps in an APM tool.
Thank you, Michael. As of now, there's nothing in the Q&A, but if anyone does have any questions, please post them.
Yeah, and I have a feeling I'm about to get to some more interesting content, which is, can APMs be a tool for product owners? So I'm only partially through this presentation, and I've gotten really technical about developers, operations, performance, etc. But I did touch on user analytics, right? And user analytics can be really important to product owners. Now, I'm sure that your product owners and managers today track a lot of basic metrics, like how much revenue is coming out of the app. They probably have Google Analytics, which tells them, basic things about their funnels, tags, marketing campaigns, etc. But there's actually a little bit more that an APM can do to augment all of those things, right? Because the APM can really tie in the conversation of performance to how it affects the user experience and what the result of that is, and maybe what the product team, development team can do about it, right? So let's talk about what is important to software product owners. And these are the product owners, are the people who make decisions about where a product is going, what's the strategy, right? What are we going to work on next? What are the features that are important now? What are the features that are important in the future? Right, so they ensure that agile projects deliver value to the business through all of that, right? They need to track user engagement with their applications and ensuring that they're meeting business objectives and creating that strategy. And they make decisions. A lot of decisions are made by product owners on what to work on, what's important, what the future is, etc. And so there's a lot of things happening just from the product side of an application, which is why applications are valuable in the first place, right? So we always have to keep our eye on the fact that all of these software applications, as cool as your technology is, as fast as it can be, is only important because it drives value for people, for businesses, for organizations, right? Your software product has to derive some kind of value for someone, and that's really what your product team is thinking about. And let's talk about, though, kind of empiricism, which is a concept in Agile, in Scrum. And I'm going to tie this into how that affects our APM tools and what that means from a product perspective, right? And so in empiricism, and empiricism is kind of about working in a fact-based, experience-based, and evidence-based manner. Like, you're not going off your gut feeling. You're not kind of like thinking, well, I think this. You're saying, I know this because here's the data. Here's the evidence. Here's the dashboard that the user is experiencing. So it's really important to have a process of empiricism built into any product system. And of course, when we talk about future strategy and vision, some of that is a lot of like, oh, I believe this is the future. That is maybe where your, kind of your gut feeling, your intuition is coming in. But we're not maybe talking about that aspect. We're talking about what we can measure from an evidence-based thing. And to be able to have empiricism, we have three main segments, right? And this is something that is talked about across all, agility and software and DevOps processes, etc. But first, we need transparency. Right, and transparency it's that window into the facts. It's the ability to see them in the first place, right? It is the facts about your performance. Like, is it slow? And exactly how slow is it, right? How many users do you actually have using your app, right? How many people are signing up for your platform every month, right? And this isn't something that you can be wishy-washy on. This is hard data. Right, you can show it in an Excel spreadsheet, you can graph it. It is absolutely true stuff. And you have to have the transparency to get those facts, right? Because if we don't operate in a world of facts and have the ability to see the facts as they are, you're not going to be able to go into the next part of this, which is the inspection, right? And this is the act of regularly inspecting the facts, inspecting your problems, seeing how the data lines up between your people, processes, tools, etc., and seeing, what that means, right? Deriving meaning from it, right? And this is where a lot of like tactical and strategic thinking comes into play, saying, hey, I have all this data, I have transparency into seeing it into real time, etc. But what about it, right? How do I look at it? What is important to this product, right? And so answer those questions, right? What exactly do you inspect? Because what we measure, what we look at is really what we're going to improve into the next part of this, which is the adaptation. This is the last step. This is where you have transparency, your evidence, you inspected it, you've derived conclusions from that data and, kind of assessments of the facts. Now you adapt. You go, okay, I have the data. I think I have some understanding of what it means. Now, what do I do about it? How do I change, right? And what change do I implement that's going to make the data better the next time I inspect it, right? And that's where we get into this circle of agility, right? Like we have transparency, inspection, adaptation, and we keep going around and around in this because every time you inspect, you adapt. You inspect what you did, how you adapted, and see if it worked or not. If it didn't work, you go back, right? If it worked awesome, you say, how do I get more of that, right? If you're increasing revenue, if you're increasing user engagement, right? This is something you want to do on a continuous basis. And if you want to be able to do that on a continuous basis, you need the tools to make that happen, right? And so when we think about how an APM is supporting this agile process of adaptation, right, you start thinking about how you interact with your users. Like if you're a consumer-based app or an enterprise-based app, it's the same thing. Like do you want to have to go out and ask your users, hey, like, do you like my application? What's going on with it? Do you think it performs well? Like those are like basic questions. Like they're good to ask, but they're really kind of table stakes, right? If those are the questions you're asking, you're kind of behind the game, right? Instead, you should be able to answer those questions by pulling up data with empiricism. And when you do go to your users and talk to them, you should be able to ask the next level questions, like what would make you more productive? What features do you really want to see? Like, what are some advanced parts that we can put in the system for you? Because you already know how they're using the current system. You know what features they're using and not using. You know how slow the experience is for them or not. You should already know that stuff. And that way, when you do talk to your users, you get to ask this, the real next level things. Right? Now let's talk about features for a minute as a concept. Features, they're like key activities a user performs in an application, right? Like they fill out a form and hit submit. They check out from a cart and buy something, right? They go through a business workflow optimizing, something for an enterprise application, right? They collect financial data and present it, from their accounting systems. There's all kinds of features and workflow paths in an applications. So when we talked about measuring performance, like how fast an API response, that's a feature of technology. But we have to consider in our APM tool measuring features of user experience and how that is affected by the technology. Because a feature is completing a workflow, right? And we want to know how fast it was completed, if it was completed with or without a lot of errors, and maybe how that changed user behavior and experience, right? And that's really where it gets interesting in these APM tools and how product owners and product teams can use the data for your next level analysis, because it may be that you see a user has to take this convoluted path to complete a workflow, and you say, hey, I see this path and I can make it faster, right? For the user to accomplish the same thing, less clicks, maybe going through less screens, and they're not using a bunch of advanced options or something you put in the screen. So that's something you can see with empirical data and change, right? And so I want you to start thinking about, maybe questions you can answer. Start posting them in chat. What are product performance indicators you would want to see an APM tool solve? I'm going to give you a taste of this. You could create a user workflow analysis tool. This is actually for kind of a mobile game or a little web app game. And I want to talk about the picture you're seeing in front of you. And it's an event-based system on where users go clicking on things. And so if you look at the initial event is what's called a scene UI, they're seeing something on the screen. And it actually shows where they came from, like, oh, they just opened the session, or they came from a different button. Right. The bigger the funnel is, means that's where more users are coming from. The smaller the funnel is, means less users are taking that path. So this is a very visual tool that's helping you create a understanding based off of underlying data, right? And from there, most users are clearly tapping button A for whatever reason, right? And that's where you have to think about your product, like, why are users doing this the most? Is that a good thing? Is that what I expect? Is that what I want? And if you don't want those things, if you don't expect it, that's when you go into the adaptation. Well, how do I make button B get on top and put button A on bottom? What do I have to change? And then also bad is that red, the set people end. They go, oh, I'm quitting right here. I'm ending my interactivity with your application. How do I prevent that ending? Like, how do I dive into deeper data to see why they ended right there? Right. And you can follow this through a complex workflow. Like right now, they're going at the top level of your workflow, they're tapping button A. Then they tap button B, tap button C, right? And then they see something, right? And you can start understanding the complexities of why users go through each step of a complex workflow. Because let's face it, most workflows that you complete within applications today, there's a lot of options on screen. There's rarely ever, one thing to do and one next button. There's usually a lot of options, a lot of widgets, a lot of tools that you've given your users in your applications to create their own experience. And you need to understand what experiences your users are chiefly using and decide how you take advantage of that to make your product better, right? And that's user flows. Additionally, you can attract things like retention from features. Like when a user uses a feature, what is the drop rate? Like after, they do a certain thing, like in this case, after view dashboard, the retention rate's only 25%. For some reason, after users view your fancy dashboard, 75% of them are dropping off, only 25% stay. Maybe they're viewing the dashboard at the end of their activity, and that's where you expect the drop off. Maybe it's not. So understand in your use case, where is the retention good, and is that good for your application? Or is that retention drop off in the middle of a workflow, and that's a bad thing, right? And additionally, you should be able in an APM tool dive into specific sessions and see click by click what they did from a feature experience perspective and kind of almost replay how it happened. And maybe you can do this on aggregate, maybe it's per user, but you want to see play by play what they experienced from a feature perspective, whether it worked or not, was successful or not. So you may need some measurement there, some indicator, how long it took to go from each one. You can see I have a timeline here. Maybe they get stuck in one for 10 minutes that you think should only take 30 seconds, right? These are all questions you can ask and think about. This is all from a product perspective. So Jordan, do we have any questions yet up to this point about product performance indicators?
No, the Q&A section is a little quiet today, but I do have a question, if that's all right.
It's all right.
So, I do recognize the importance of tracking like user flow and features and things like that, and it kind of makes you think. Excuse me, sorry, my dog is growling at the mailman. Sorry about that. So it makes you think, kind of what to test and how to test. So what do you recommend, like testing every feature, every possible user flow? Is there certain things that you should prioritize, or is the system robust enough to really track everything?
Well, that's an excellent question. And first, it is not robust enough to track everything right away for you. Almost, especially when it comes to user analytics, a lot of the APM tools give you a couple things out of the box, like page views, etc., like how long it takes to load a page. But to see a workflow, that is actually like you're putting code hints. You have to tell your developers, hey, when the user does this, you need to tell the APM system that it happened. And that's usually not something automatic because what's happened is very centered towards your product, your use case. So you do have to prioritize what is most important to your workflow first. Like what's the most valuable feature of your app? Maybe that drives revenue or drives some kind of key metric that is important to your product or organization. And that's what you work on first, because that's the first thing you need to inspect and then be able to adapt changes to. And over time, as you build up a deliberate discipline of doing this and creating this empirical system that is ever in a loop, right? You're in a constant loop of creating transparency, inspecting, and adapting. Over time, you'll eventually measure maybe the majority of your features. And in a way, it's important to slowly get to that point because you do also need to see features that are dead weight to your application. Because something I also didn't talk about is feature debt. And feature debt is when you have features that maybe take development time, resources, et cetera, to maintain, but no one's using them, right? And that's just as important to know as how much people are using your most important systems, because it may be preventing you from accelerating further because you're maintaining this baggage. So over time, you do need to measure a lot of your feature sets, but I would say start with what is your primary driver of value for your software product, but then you slowly work it in to everything else, especially as you get to understand your tooling.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And I guess in a way, once you are able to tweak this user tracking, you can sort of get a better sense of what is going on, what is happening within your app, instead of having everything thrown at you at once.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question, Jordan, and thank you for everyone who joined me today. Please hit me up on LinkedIn. You can find me. You can also hit me up at Twitter. I'm at Slater Codes. That's my moniker for a lot of stuff these days, my GitHub as well. If you're interested in asking any further questions about this or talk about some APM tools or other related stuff, I look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. That was a really great talk. We were always happy to have you on here with us. And to everyone on the call, thank you for joining us today. Please keep an eye out for our next virtual lunch and learn. We have one every Friday from noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. We look forward to having you join us next time. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.